Can I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? Well, good morning. My name is Jim Thompson, and I am the CEO of the InSource Group, and I want to thank you all for coming. Now, I know you're probably sitting out there wondering to yourself, I wonder if he's a millennial. The answer is decidedly no, I'm not. However, I am surrounded by them. I have two at home, and I have more than I can count at work. So this topic that we have today, how to grow, hire, and manage a millennial, is very near and dear to my heart. It really interests me in terms of the response that we got to this topic, because it was really pretty overwhelming, and I'm supposing that part of the reason for that response is that we're all kind of struggling with how to best come to terms with this whole millennial challenge, which I think is made particularly poignant by the fact that by 2020, millennials will comprise 50% of the workplace. So this is something that we all have to get more knowledgeable about, better at. It's incumbent on our ability to be successful, and there's clearly a lot to learn. You read endlessly about various characteristics. I'm not sure how informed those all are, or whether this is actually a stereotype. I think we're going to have a very, very interesting conversation today to learn a little bit more about how to be more effective in this environment. So, on behalf of the InSource Group, I'd like to thank you for coming. As you all probably are aware, for the past 27 years, we've been responsible for assisting our clients in the acquisition of high technology talent, regardless of which generation they may fall into. And it's our pleasure to host this event today, and what I'd like to do now is turn it over to our moderator, who will be introducing you to our panel themselves. Now, just a word of explanation. Julian Placino is our panel moderator today. He is the founder of Pathways to Success, but more importantly, he is a millennial. So, Julian, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Well, good morning, everyone. Is my mic turned on? Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. My name is Julian Placino. I'm a senior talent acquisition professional, the host of the Pathways to Success podcast, and the founder of the Pathways to Success training company. So having been a technology recruiter now for the past 12 years, I've had the privilege of hiring hundreds of technology professionals, both infrastructure and also development. And having that insight has given me very clear perspective into what it takes to find the right match for your organization. And that right match forms the acronym MSLOMAC: motivation, skills, location, opportunity, money, availability, and culture. And when all those variables are in alignment, both for candidate and employer, you technically have the right match based on objective variables. But one step further to gain clarity on that process is to truly understand your target candidate. And as mentioned, millennials are the largest segment in the workforce, and that's why this conversation is very relevant in terms of how to hire, manage, and grow millennial talent. So for me, whenever I try to create results in life, I try to learn from someone who's already produced those results as well. And I'm very excited to introduce you to our panel now. First, we have Richard Reed. And Richard is the Vice President of Business Development of Corporate Technology Solutions for Freeman Company. He has nearly 30 years of experience in technology, sales, and consultation, and has been leading and managing teams since 2002. He currently serves as a brand experience and event technology business development liaison, focusing on growing Freeman's business and maintaining credibility and trust with clients. He has authored numerous articles in industry publications, is a speaker on event technology, and is also on the board of the XD Leadership Alliance. Please welcome Richard Reed.
Thanks, sir.
Richard. And next we have Michael Hubbard. And Michael Hubbard is an accomplished technology leader in retail, e-commerce, and mobile, with over 20 years of experience inspiring and motivating teams to deliver their best. Over the last 2.5 years, Michael served as the director of iOS and web engineering at BottleRocket, one of the premier mobile developers in the world, where he led a team of over 30 millennials and Gen Z software engineers developing world-class mobile experiences. Today, Michael is a product owner and mobile product consultant with JCPenney. Let's hear it from Michael Hubbard. And last but not least, we have Jonathan Campos. And Jonathan is the Chief Technology Officer of Dallas's newest ride-hailing startup, Alto. He is a seasoned technologist with over 15 years of development and leadership experience. Having led large and small teams at various companies for years, Jonathan comes with a wealth of experience in what it takes to hire, grow, and retain top talent from a variety of backgrounds focused in the technology industry. Please welcome Jonathan Campos. And Jonathan, are you technically a millennial?
I am technically a millennial. Right at the top.
All right, there we go. Cool. Awesome.
You didn't ask me that question.
So to set the agenda for today, so this conversation is meant to be a conversation starter. So I'll be running about 30 to 40 minutes. But as we have the conversation, please start to document and write down your questions. Because ultimately, this is not about us. It's our ability to deliver value to you. Cool? Awesome. So Michael, Jonathan, and Richard, before we get started, anything you'd like to say?
I'll start with, I had my staff meeting with my team this morning, and I had to shift it because I'm visit with you guys, and I was letting them know what the topic was, and I clearly had one millennial on my team. He's 26 years old, and then another gentleman on my team. I informed him that I looked up what years millennials were born through what years, and he said, "I'm not a millennial. I'm a Gen Xer," and he was adamant that he did not want to be qualified as a millennial. So I thought that's
Awesome. All right, here's the mic right here. So we're going to be passing this around here and taking turns, all right? Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first topic that we will discuss is approaching hiring the millennial generation. So starting with Richard, what would you say are the distinct characteristics of the millennial generation?
It's interesting when I look at that. I have found that when I look at it and I try to focus on the positive, it's about having purpose, right, and making an immediate impact, and also noting that it's as much about not the generation, but the time in which we live, in a digital transformative age. So the fact that millennials don't know a time when there wasn't the internet feeds that focus on digital transformation. So that's where I find that a lot of those characteristics come from, not necessarily because of when they were born or how their parents raised them, right? So, thank you.
Mike?
From what I've seen in the last, 15 years or so, I mean, they haven't been around that long, but they're really passionate and driven. And I think I've seen millennials have similar attributes to boomers and other generations. In the technology space, I get a lot of really passionate and driven people, especially at BottleRocket. It's really high caliber talent. Their grasp of time is different than other generations for sure, especially in the morning. They're just non-existent or sleeping until 9, 10 o'clock. So that's, I think, a commonality that I've seen.
Totally love it. So this morning I was at the gym. I know, I'm going to be a storyteller. I was at the gym. I was talking to a buddy of mine that's now retired that was doing project management for years. And I said, yeah, I'm going to be doing this thing this afternoon. And his first thought was, oh, you're talking about millennials? Well, they're all lazy. They don't want to work. They don't do anything. And I was like, okay, that's one way to immediately go about it and not cause a great team dynamic. But sure, you can go down that road. Again, he's retired, so he can say that kind of stuff. For myself, though, whenever this topic came up, I've always found that with millennials and with working with anyone that's younger and in the industry right now is really to focus on challenging them. They may some of them may have a different concept of time. They may have a low time concept as a culture where, again, the starting time is more of a recommendation, not a hard time. So if you say show up around 8:30 and they show up at like 9:30, it's still within their bounds of reality. That said, though, a lot of them I found are easy to kind of go off into their own area, and if you don't give them specific tasks to keep working on, they start floating off and working on new things, which is not always a bad thing. However, if you challenge them, you'll be surprised every time where that one performer that you feel like just doesn't get it or doesn't really want to put in the hard work, all of a sudden will come back in on Monday morning and say how they worked all weekend long, all hours, and you're seeing their code being pushed through at all times. Because for them, they were challenged. They finally got something that they wanted to sink their teeth into. And so if you do that hard challenge for them and maybe push them even further, that's when you're really going to start seeing them go all the way to 11.
And Jonathan, we'll have you keep the mic and we'll go this way around, okay?
Perfect.
So we've all heard the generalizations that millennials can be impatient, lazy, and entitled. What would you consider to be the best positive attribute that's unique to the millennial generation?
So I'm going to echo what Michael said, where they can be very driven, but in a different way. You may expect driven as in, an 8 to 5 driven, and they're going to be professionals just in those hours and get their work done. But they're driven in their own pursuits. So the big thing is to try to find how to line up your pursuits and their pursuits. This goes back to just asking them, what are you interested in? Oh, you're interested in this kind of technology? Let me assign you those tasks around that technology, and they will go much further and much faster than you'll ever imagine because it interests them, and they will spend all day long consuming that topic over and over and over again and growing.
Thank you, Jonathan.
To expand on the driven aspect, I've seen a lot of millennials. They're also kind of entrepreneurs in kind of the gig economy. So they've got side gigs, nights, weekends. They're doing sort of creative things, especially with developers. They can be developers for small companies. You can get a gig easily, and they can make extra money. And money is, from what I can tell, pretty important to them. And I loved your point of give them a challenge. I've had an engineer. Some millennials don't really know what they want to do when they grow up, and they're just developers because it's fun, it's easy money, and they've got the skills of being a developer. It's not that hard to become an actual developer if you're driven. And one person he wasn't sure if he wanted to be a web developer or an iOS developer, so I gave him an opportunity to be an iOS developer. He didn't do anything really to learn iOS development, Swift, or any of the languages. So I allowed him, gave him the flexibility to fail. He switched into an iOS development position, didn't like it, and then he resigned 2 weeks later. And I'm like, no, don't resign. You don't have to resign just because you don't like it. You're a great web developer. I need web developers. Go back to being a web developer. He's like, oh, that's interesting. So he stayed as a web developer. It took him three resignations to finally actually leave. But I love they are passionate, they're driven. Sometimes they just need guidance and direction on where they could be best leveraged.
Yeah, I would echo that, Michael. They are extremely driven, and so I think sometimes they get saddled with they're impatient or they're entitled. I think it's because they want so badly to contribute as quickly as they can. So I agree with both of you in that if you can find a focus for them, help them focus, and kind of guide them. We do a lot of design thinking and customer experience focus in the way that our methodologies go, and I find that I apply that to them. When they say that they want to become it may come across as I'm entitled, I want to become a leader. It's, well, what is it you're trying to accomplish, and articulate it for me. And I find that if you can have them, take and channel that drive towards inspiring kind of a shared vision, that's where the real opportunity lies.
Okay, great. And Richard, we'll start with you. What have been your best sourcing methods, resources, or talent pools to find top millennial talent in technology?
I call it keep it simple. One of the things I find is as you start to build a team and you do a lot of peer recommendations, I find that good people want to work with other good people, and I know a lot of other good people that kind of have the same work ethic. So I tend to focus on the peer submissions if I can.
So referrals. Okay, great.
Absolutely true. I think peer referrals, friends, they want to work with their friends, especially at fun places. Bottle Rocket's got a kegerator, so there's a couple kegs. I had a whiskey cart behind my desk. It's a fun place, and people want to work at a fun place with people that they enjoy. I've leveraged recruiting events and there's Dev Mountain boot camps, and then we brought in a bunch of Dev Mountain candidates. Maybe 1 in 40 was a diamond in the rough and worth investing in, and we did, and they're an amazing engineer. But so some recruiting events, and I think when I was at Bottle Rocket, 20 to 40% of my job, depending on the week, was focused on recruiting. I would even use LinkedIn Recruiter to spot good talent, more on the senior side, and do my best to poach them. So like directly involved in recruiting, and not just leave it to, I mean, amazing recruiters do their job, but I can also see great talent.
So this may be a generational thing. I know that whenever I've worked with clients, this whole topic is a generational thing, I guess. Whenever I've worked with clients, there's some clients that when they're trying to hire, the first thing they do is they send out an email and say, you're going to get a $500 bonus if you find this candidate for this person, for this position. And that just doesn't seem to resonate as much with millennials. Again, it's more about their friends and people they know and people that they loved working with. And I can tell you, any of the employees that I have or have had in the past that recommended somebody, those are the ones that are really engaged with the company. If they're just getting someone in just to get a bonus, they don't care about the company and the work, and maybe they need to be challenged more. If they're challenged though and interested, they'll come in to do the work and the technology that you're using more than anything else, and they'll keep bringing those other people in. Half my team is referral based right now, and you can tell it's amazing. They immediately come in, they welcome their friend in, they help bring them on board, they show them what's new and interesting. It makes my life a lot easier, makes everything work easier.
Love it. Starting with Jonathan, part of what we do as employers is we have to really entice a candidate to apply to our company, right? So what have you discovered that sells a company or opportunity to a millennial?
So the two things that I find that sell the most are challenge, which I know I keep using that word, but it just really is that important, and the environment. So for myself, there's some things. So I worked with Michael at Bottle Rocket for a while, and Julian too, not to leave him out. And I stole some of their ideas when it comes to setting up an environment and a culture that you get to work with. So for myself, now we work in a environment that is 100% just flex vacation time. We don't watch PTO. I don't care. I don't keep up with that. I just need to know when you're going to be there, when you're not going to be there, and make sure to communicate. This is a big selling point to them because they start realizing, and they literally, everyone that I explain this to, the unlimited PTO policy, the first words they say are, so basically you're going to treat me like an adult. And I go, yes. Literally, that's the exact words. And I'm like, yes, you are an adult. You get your work done. I'm not going to worry about where you are at what time. Okay. Can I bring my dog in? Yeah, I don't care. As long as they're, well trained and taken care of, bring your dog in. That's fine. These are little things that they're immediately blows their mind. They can do this stuff. And then beyond that, though, you can tell they come in and they want to hear, what is their technology stack? What are you using? Are you on new stuff? Are you on old stuff? Like, how hard is it to actually, play with new technology? How encouraging are you of learning new technology and new stuff in general? And that big sell. You're going to learn something new. You're going to be challenged all the time, and you can see their eyes just light up. They're ready to go.
I love the treating them as an adult. You did kind of steal that, but that's good. But I mean, you treat them with respect. They are people. They're humans, and maybe that's just my own sort of people management leadership style. Is I do like to treat people with respect, give them boundaries for which to excel, also which to fail, and learn from that. But then I try and be myself. I think, especially in the recruiting process, if they can get an understanding of who their people manager will be, who their manager will be, I think it helps them to make a connection, a real connection with the company. And sometimes, generally, I'm an ass. I don't know if I can say that on the podcast, but so I mean, if someone made Jell-O shots and it's in the lounge, and I'm making Bottle Rocket sound like a bunch of alcoholics, it's not. But if there are Jell-O shots in the kitchen area, then I'll bring them to an interview because it livens up the interview. It's fun. We have beer, especially in the afternoons. This isn't the morning. In the afternoons, we'll have beer or whiskey or something. But my goal is to try and make a connection with them and kind of get on their level.
Yeah, and I feel like we're always at the end. I agree totally with these guys are saying, and I'll take it, I guess, one step further in that one of the things that I do almost immediately is make it a team environment and make sure they know that I leave my title at the door, and that when you come through and we're going to work on a project, you have as much say as the next person. Now, where the challenge comes in for them is, but have something to contribute and to say. I know I can be a little bit passive aggressive because I'll ask the questions that I need to have answered, but there's an expectation that if you're going to come and have an equal seat at the table, that you can contribute. And so, but I try to go out of my way to make sure that I'm not just always dictating, that I do value the input that they bring.
Love it. Richard, when it comes to getting to know a millennial candidate, how do you approach or prepare for an interview with a millennial?
You know, it's kind of funny. And when I was kind of chatting with Julian, it's not so much that I'm talking to, I say, a millennial candidate versus an Xer candidate, or I don't think I have any boomer candidates anymore. But for me, I think it's about I take the perspective again. I focus on design thinking and customer experience. So I try to get almost immediately immersed. I spend a lot of time at the beginning of an interview sharing what the environment is going to be like. I try to be as honest as I can, the good, the bad, everything that comes with it, because I want them to have context in which they're going to answer their questions. But I try to immerse them as much as you can in an interview about what the environment is like, and then what reality looks like for them in that environment.
Thank you, Richard. Michael?
Just to add to that, learning the environment, that's absolutely wonderful. I think one of my, I guess I focus more on the tail end of the interview in that aspect. But in the beginning, I try and learn more as much as I can about the candidate. What's really important to the candidate in their work life, what's important to them in their personal life, because with work-life balance, or whatever it's called now, work kind of ebbs and flows between the nights and sometimes weekends. But my goal is to understand as much as I can about that candidate, to see if they're going to be a good fit culturally within the company, and to see if me as a people manager, if I can help them, grow, if I can meet their needs as an individual.
So whenever I'm actually speaking with a candidate, one thing that I definitely worry about is, and asking them early on in the discussions, usually on like my first phone screen, is where do you ultimately want to go? And I make sure, bring down the bar. You don't have to say, I want to go exactly where your company wants to go. No, where do you personally want to go? If we're going in the same path, great. We're going to be very happy together. If we're not, that's okay too. Maybe I know someone else that you can talk to, but it may not be for us. And just try to bring down the conversation from very much an interview to a conversation. That said, I always definitely like to ask what they did last, not to check a box, where I've seen some interviewers, they just ask as a, what did you do last time? Check. Okay, great. It's more to see how are they going to tell the story of what they last did. In this case, I'm really looking for cognitive complexity. How deep can they get into the details? Because as a technologist, the details really matter. And if they just glance over something, I'll either start drilling in more to see how much they really knew about that and how they can get into it, or I'll realize that they can't drill into it, and maybe they don't have the complexity and the ability to think in that way to get into it. So it's really just part of that conversation and looking for those key indicators of their own thought process.
So Jonathan, you already started with the next question here, but what are some of the other key specific... No, that was great, thank you. What are some of the other specific key questions you ask when you interview millennials?
Key questions. I do have a few that are I have a few of my own personal interview questions that some people hate and some people love.
Let's hear it.
And one of them that I like to ask about a technologist is, I want you to diagram out for me and walk me through a login example. I know it seems simple. Every developer at some point has had to implement a login, but how are they going to do it? And I want to see them actually walk through the steps and show, again, that cognitive complexity. Can they actually drill into each step and understand what's happening at what stage? For some of my really junior candidates, they get to a point and they start getting lost. And I go, well, just keep walking through it. Keep talking through it. They might not have the exact right answer, but you can start seeing, is their mind working? Are they starting to solve the problem? Are they asking questions? And beyond that, once I start moving further, you start giving some more logic questions. Again, it's less about the actual code and can you figure out the syntax, but more can you work through the problem. And then finally, one of the little mean questions that I ask, which is going to sound just silly as anything else, but I ask them, draw me a house. And I just leave that out there, draw me a house. And sometimes I have a candidate sit there and spend the end of their 20 to 30 minute interview drawing me this amazing house. And I immediately disregard that candidate as a possible candidate to hire. Or I have a candidate, they'll immediately start, and usually they'll put the pen to the paper and they'll pause and they'll be like, what kind of house do you want me to draw? You're done, you're good. You've passed the test. I want them to ask me a question. I want to throw out something so big and grandiose that there's no way that they can just start doing it without asking a question. Because as a developer, if I give you a task, I need you to build this, and I walk away and I don't give you very much context, and you just go off for the next 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years and start building that without any real questions, you are worthless to me. You are actually wasting my time. As opposed to actually stopping and asking some qualifying questions. How do you want this work? How do you want this to be done? Now, you're starting to be inquisitive and you're starting to understand your job, and you're much more helpful to me.
That's awesome. Thanks, man.
Jonathan and I did a lot of interviews together, so I've seen that damn login question so many times, and so many people struggle through it. It's good though. It is a really good question. So I'm not an engineer, but I've been an engineering manager for over 15 years, and I've done various roles within retail. But so I don't do the technical vetting of candidates. I vet whether or not they're a good cultural fit, so the behavioral part. So I have typical situation, behavior, outcome questions. Tell me about a time when, blah, blah, blah. I generally focus and try to focus on how well they do with conflict management, conflict resolution, and depending on the level of the candidate, it's whether or not they're going to be a pain in the rear for their lead developer if they just commit stuff that completely violates architectural standards or whatnot, or if a lead's going to be able to manage and lead the team through conflict. So a lot of what I do try and dig into is see how well they can handle conflict. And then, like I said, the behavioral part, are they going to gel well with the team? Are they going to fit well with the company?
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah. So no, it's funny. I remember doing some of those on a lot of technical interviews. I know. Again, I'm really big on immersion and experience, and so I try to bring that into the interview. And so with that in mind, oftentimes I'll go in and as I'm vetting out their experience, I may ask questions. For example, like instead of the whole traditional, what's your weakness? Remember the what's your weakness question? I would ask something along the lines of, in your last review with your manager, what did they discuss with you about your strengths and your weaknesses? And it gives you a little bit different perspective, because they think they're prepared for the what's my weakness, but it gives them, because you're challenging them now to like you said, a little bit of conflict resolution in terms of, okay, what did your boss think of you, and then what did you think of what your boss thinks of you, right? And so that forces them to kind of answer that a little different. Back to your you reminded me when you talked about the house. One of my favorite ways to close an interview was I would thank them for their time, and then I would act as though we were getting ready to adjourn, and then I said, oh, by the way, I have one more question for you. I said, you didn't know this, but you came for this interview today, and I need to let you know that there is an elephant in the parking lot next to your car, and you're going to need to take that with you. Can you explain to me how you're going to do that? And so It's one of those questions where you kind of disarm them and get them to think immediately outside the box, and you're pretty sure they're not anticipating that kind of a question, but you almost get to see the real sense of the person. And then finally, I bring in peers whenever I can, people that are working the job. I think that they get a lot of satisfaction out of being able to have some hand in the interview of a peer. One that comes to mind is when I was hiring for help desk staff. My existing help desk just got so much joy out of being the customer and grilling this potential help desk candidate. So it's almost like an initiation, right, into becoming a help desk. But we learned so much about the candidate by kind of dropping them right into that scenario.
Awesome. Question for all three before we move on to the next subject. Is there anything else that you think we should know about how to more effectively recruit or hire millennials?
I would say again, kind of staying on the same thing. Keep it real. Keep it as real for you as you can for them. I think that's the one thing we never know with an interview, right? What you're going to get, especially with regard to the way that everyone prepares, right? You get online and you read all the interview guides, you read all the interview questions, you prepare, and we've all interviewed, right? We know it. We know the drill. We do it. So there's a sense of getting to know whether it's a generational, if it is a millennial, or you're an Xer. You know that going into the interview process, are you going to come out of that experience with them, knowing that they would make a good member of your team? Are they going to be able to participate? And because you're already there, you know what your environment is like. It's your duty to learn about them, right? But you want to share as much about what they're coming into, or you're not going to keep them, right? What's that saying that employees leave their bosses? Right, and if they're happy, you can make them happy. I love some of the examples of, hey, don't quit. We'll find something for you. I think as much as you can learn and develop a relationship with the candidate in the process, I think you'll just be that much further down the road.
Still wondering what happened to that elephant, but I do my best to connect with people on a personal level in the interview. And like I said before, I ask a lot of questions. I try and find out what's really important to them, and then I try and share stories, personal stories, and don't just. And I am a different kind of people manager. I know that I'm weird, but I try and share personal stories. And to Campus or Jonathan's point before, around just getting to their level, and if you share personal stories that they're able to then resonate with as a millennial, and I'm sure as heck not a millennial. Then I think they can see themselves, they can envision themselves at the company and working for me as a people manager.
I know we've talked about it earlier that some of the biggest selling points to any company is the culture. And one thing that I like to steal from other people's good ideas. So one thing that a concept I stole from the Google hiring process is to meet with someone and see, would you be willing to sit with them for 3 hours on a plane? And really think about it in that way. Bring your other team members in, meet them, ask them that question. Are you willing to sit with next to this person on a plane for 3 hours? And that will help build your team roster of a good culture. So that way, when the next person comes in, this culture you want to keep building and keep the ball rolling.
Awesome. We're now moving on to management of millennials. Jonathan, what are some of the key differences in how you've managed millennials versus any other generation in the past?
With millennials, I've given them a lot more of the why. Why are you doing this? Again, so that way it's not just a matter of, okay, this task needs to be done, period. Here you go. For some boomers and others that I've managed, that's been enough. We need to get this done. Cool. Get to work. It's the way it is. With millennials, though, it's more about the why. Like, this is really important. This is going to help change this. This number from X to Y is going to happen because of this. Once they see the importance, they take it, they start internalizing it, and they run with it. Again, this is how you get that developer that's going to work all weekend because they realize this is going to move the ball.
That's great. I think also connecting their work with their values and with the company's values. As long as the company does have solid stated values and everyone can understand them, that's great. Not every company is really good at that, at being transparent and communicating their values. So helping millennials, I don't know why I think boomers and other generations kind of figured that out and were able to make the connection and understand the connection between their values and company values. Millennials seem, at least from what I can see, need a little help in having that conversation and dialogue around making that connection.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I would even take it a step further. When you've got your boomers and your Gen Xers and your millennials working together in project teams, I find that I spend as much time getting them to, trying to help them learn how to work together because of those various perspectives. Or again, your boomers are saying, "Hey, give me a task, I'm going to go take care of it," and then they're coming to me saying, "I've got a millennial on my team that's asking me all these why questions, and can you please tell them to stop doing that?" And so that's been probably the more interesting challenge, is to kind of I call it trying to make sure we inspire a shared vision, and so that when you get them all in the room together, let them ask the why. Sometimes I'll even be the one that'll ask the why on behalf of the millennial, because I know it's coming.
Gotcha. Okay. And it feels like we touched a little bit on this already, but once you have hired a millennial, what have you discovered that truly motivates them? What are their values?
Oh, like I said, I think we've hit on this as part of the hiring process. Is they have a strong desire to succeed. Sometimes they don't know how they're going to succeed. They just want to say they want to be successful, and so I think that focusing, helping them focus on that. I find that I've learned to be somewhat passive aggressive, in that I will ask a lot of leading questions that I often know they haven't considered. But they're willing to consider it, as long as they just don't want to be told to do task A, task B. They would much rather say, here's what success, or here's what beautiful looks like, right? And now you tell me how we're going to get there, and then kind of, like I said, being a little bit passive aggressive. That's where we can apply our experience without them feeling like we're just always telling them what to do. So.
Gotcha.
I think paying them market value or better, so they don't have to question whether or not they can get a better salary at another company, because the reality is they can. Even if they are getting market value or better, they can, in the technology space, you can jump and get typically a 20% increase. Even within just 2-3 years within a company, it's relatively easy to do that. So paying them market salary, paying them what they're worth, but then to your point, actually helping them understand how they can grow and develop in their career. So I'm not a coder, software developer. I'm a career developer. I coach and develop talent to be their best possible people. And if they have a clear plan, a clear understanding of what they need to work on, how they can work on it, and what success looks like, to your point, then they're going to try and work on that, even if they don't know they're really working on that. And kind of leading into how I do one-on-ones.
Yeah, I was trying to how can I answer this question without bringing up one-on-ones, because I know it's coming up. But once you hire, you start. I quickly ask the questions. What are you interested in? Where you want to go? And if I hire the person, I definitely take note of where they want to go, because if you keep reminding them, this is what you told me, that resonates with them. You heard me. You're listening. You're trying to help me go to where I want to be. Again, shared path. Then, as we start getting one-on-ones, you start reminding them of that shared path. Are we still on it? Are you still interested in this? Are you wanting to grow? Are you being challenged? And some people, once you get hired, they realize, the landscape's a little bit different than what I was expecting when I first was asking. But this new thing is interesting. This new thing. Okay, how can we start shifting that path to follow? And again, that just leads to them being challenged and being more interested, more involved.
Jonathan, how have you managed conflict with millennials in the past?
So, conflict with millennials, this is where I treat someone like a human. I don't think it's specifically to millennials as opposed to just anybody. You deal with it directly. You make sure to give a good example and a good exact reason of what kind of conflict you're dealing with. You deal with it on a one-on-one basis. So, we have a problem. There's some kind of breakdown in our communication. Okay, let's work through, whatever situation we're currently in, and then as soon as possible, so that way that there's no amount of time that's separating it and causing more of a rift. Let's actually pull aside. Let's work through it. Most likely it's a process situation. Even if it seems personal, It's usually a process. How can we tweak how we're working together and work through it? Again, they're human, they're intelligent, they're in technology, we assume they're intelligent. They can work through it and just deal with them very directly.
That's pretty much echoing what you said. Directly, candidly, I'm more on the aggressive side, so I am very direct, but I do so in a candid and honest way. And when you've built trust and respect with the individual, and giving feedback is not easy, but if you include 3 core elements of feedback, specific, timely, and focus on behaviors, not the actual person themselves, they're more likely to receive that feedback and understand why there was conflict, what their role in the conflict was, and how they can not do that again or remedy the situation.
Well, I'll use a case study to answer that. You remember at the beginning of the talk, I talked about a guy who would not identify as a millennial. He's right there on the cusp, but he acts like a millennial. I don't say it that way, but he totally acts like a millennial. And so I came over, and this was a gentleman who's already part of an existing sales team, and the focus of his revenue was in an area where I thought that there wasn't a lot of growth, but he was adamant that he could grow it. And so I just wanted him to defend it, right? Tell me how you're going to get to $3 million next year, up from $2 million this year. And I think that giving him an opportunity to defend it helped diffuse the situation, because I gave him a voice. And then there are times, we would say pick and choose your battles. I consciously let them win the small ones. They don't know that they're the small ones, but I will let them win the small ones so that I can get them to focus on the big ones. And then there's an understanding there that from a conflict resolution that, again, I'm not just saying, go forth and do exactly as I say. They know they've got a voice, and they know that I'm open to hearing what they have to say.
Richard, what is the best management technique or hack for millennials that you have learned over the past year?
Kind of along those same lines. I have. This is where I've had to learn a lot of patience for myself, because I'm very aggressive like you, and I'm quick to tell. One of the things I found, especially coming in my role into an existing team, I know that they were bringing their own perspectives. I found that the hack for me is to let it roll, let it go for some period of time, and then again, it sounds a little passive aggressive, but then challenge them. For example, my 26-year-old. He would never take notes when we talked, and I said, okay, all right, rather than say, dude, take notes. When we had subsequent meetings, I would ask him things specifically. I knew there were details I knew he had not written down, and so that forced him to, and he did not it was very uncomfortable for him to sit there and not be able to answer a question. So to me, that was the hack of kind of putting it back on him.
Great, thank you.
I would echo patience. They will push you to your limits. Patience being myself, I had a guy call in or Slack in, basically saying he was going to be working from home for a few days because he had some allergies. And I'm like, that's BS. They're not allergies. What's going on? Turns out he bleached his hair so much that his body had a reaction, and I wouldn't call it allergies, but but I didn't care, and very similar, and we have very similar philosophies where I don't care when and where they work as long as they get their work done. And he knew he had expectations for that sprint to get his deliverables done. Whether or not he was suffering through pain of a bleached haircut, that's his thing to work through. And he did work, from home for a couple days, and he got his stuff done. But he knew his expectations. And I think if I were a younger, less patient person, I would have gotten upset probably that he wasn't in the office, he wasn't working with the team. So flexibility and patience has been important.
So I want to agree completely, but there's every once in a while you do need to bring down the hammer just a little bit. For the most part, yes, a lot of flexibility. I like to give the ability for my employees to fail carefully. I watch, okay, you're working on this thing. You really feel like you want to do it this way. Based on years of experience, I'm going to tell you that's the wrong way. But you know what? Yeah, I don't tell them that part. I just go well, I'd prefer you this way, but try it out. And I know it's going to be painful. I know that after about a day or two, they're going to come back and be like, hey, let's talk through that again. However, I'm going to bring up another story here. I had one employee the other day, this is a couple months ago, show up to work, and he goes, hey, sorry, I drove all the way out here, and I realized I left my computer at home, so I guess I'm going to have to just head home and work for the rest of the day from home to save, the drive back. And I go, wow, it seems like you got a lot of driving to do today, and you're going to have to come right back here after you get your computer. And just kind of set the tone, like, that's not okay. Your laptop is part of being at work. He's personally fairly new to the professional workforce, so he didn't know how to deal with that situation, but I want to let him know, like, this is not okay. And this exact behavior is not okay. And I made sure to point that out. And he drove home and drove all the way back. And yes, he lost an extra hour worth of work, but I wanted to make sure to send the point that there's certain lines that you cannot cross, and there's certain bits that you need to do to be professional.
So the reason why this topic is so popular is because we're all trying to figure out how best to work alongside and with millennials. So what kind of advice would you give our audience on how best to gain influence in cooperation with the millennial generation? Jonathan.
I'm going to echo Richard here, which is definitely like, leave your title at the door. Just throw that out. Bring the whole, I like to do more of a laissez-faire leadership style. So, bring it down and make it a flat organization of, we're all throwing in ideas, we're all making calls. And I do try to keep quiet for most of the meeting, so the way everyone else has a voice. I know that just, sitting in a meeting with my other developers as CTO versus anyone else, just any word I say just immediately stomps down on all discussions. So I actually try to remove myself from a lot of conversation. Some people may consider me just overly quiet, but I do it on purpose.
Okay, so I have a question. How many people in the room are actually hiring managers? I think there's a few, yeah. So think of the people who report to you. Do you know specifically for each individual person what is important to them in their personal life, in their career? And do you have regular conversations with them about that? It's not just about their work, and some of it, the values and making sure that they succeed and excel at work is important as well. But if you make that personal connection, you can build trust and respect with a person, then you can manage them in a casual way. I don't wear blazers around developers, it scares them for some reason, but you have to do like ironic t-shirts or something, which
They were all surprised I had a button down today.
yeah, I didn't know I didn't know he owned any, but anyways. But making that personal connection, building trust and respect, and talking to them, part of talking, listening to them and actively listening is really, really important.
I would agree, and it's interesting. I started having staff meetings with my team, and it was when you're leading a bunch of BD people, especially that are out hunting. One of the first things I learned is that because I come out of a traditional technology organization, they weren't used to having to come together and contribute as a team. They're thinking they're just out there on their own. So one of the first things I instituted was they get to decide, they get to pick a topic that they're going to discuss during our staff meetings, and they were really surprised because it was like, well, what do I talk about? I said, well, what do you want to talk about? And I said, and they said, I can talk about anything. I said, absolutely anything. And so a lot of them a couple of them were really engaged with that. And first, I think they struggled with the freedom to come up with a topic that they wanted to discuss. But then, kind of fast forwarding to this morning's staff meeting, about a week ago, we're setting the agenda, and I'm asking, I'm asking my admin to get everything prepped. And I asked I said, I'm just curious, what are the guys' topics? And my problem child, Gen Xer, who doesn't know he's a millennial, he says, I don't have a topic for this month. And I said, this is not optional, but it's interesting too. And this is one of, and it's kind of interesting too with that person who's right on that cusp. He wants to be a manager of people. He wants to work in the management, and so he doesn't know it, but a lot of the things I'm challenging him with are, if you really want to sit in the seat, you're going to have to think a lot differently than you do today. So.
Gotcha. We're now at our final topic before we enter into the Q&A, which is how to grow millennial talent. Starting with Richard. What strategies have you implemented in the past to get the most out of millennial talent?
And again, for me, since I have been managing people since the early aughts, it's not even about a millennial thing. It's about the continuum of their growth, right? So I find that when you hire, say you're hiring someone right out of college, you know that they're at the stage of their career where they're helping, right? They're learning and helping, and you're tasking them accordingly, and then hopefully they're learning from there to contribute independently. And then they're moving to a leadership coaching role, and then hopefully, if you've been good at developing them, they move into an ideation and a directing role. And so for me, I'm just very when I do my annual performance reviews and development planning for my team, I'm very conscious of where they fall in that continuum, and I plan accordingly.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I love the planning is very, very important, and I do that at an individual level. So. And it's actually regardless of whether they're Gen X or millennial, doesn't matter to me the generation, they need to be managed and led and developed on an individual level. That to me is, I think, the most important.
For myself, making sure they feel they have ownership over something and continue to assign them ownership. Oh, okay, this task we're working on, you are the leader, you are the throat to choke on this. That brings them in, that makes them more involved, but then that also makes them have to start coming up with ideas and start problem solving. And they start getting bigger and bigger problems, and they start realizing that this is the process everyone has to go through. And pretty quickly they start asking questions of how to solve it better. But yeah, ownership is a big thing.
And Jonathan, you were talking about one-on-ones. So is there a particular coaching format or methodology that you've used during your one-on-ones to get the most out of growing your millennial talent?
Yes, so one very hard rule I have is I don't use one-on-ones to deal with disciplinary issues. I don't use one-on-ones to talk about any kind of problems that they've had or whatever else. Again, if we've had a conflict, deal with that directly at that time. I don't want them to be dreading going into their one-on-one. That is breaking down the purpose of a one-on-one. On top of that, I set up just open spots on my calendar where at any time they can actually schedule a one-on-one, and I leave that open. I've got some employees that specifically already pre-scheduled from now until 6 months from now. I've got some employees that literally just yesterday set a meeting for this afternoon. That's up to them, and I want to make sure that they feel like they've got that ownership of, I'm ready to have this next discussion, I'm ready to grow. Then once we get in those discussions, then it's more about what can I do to help grow them and start listening to them very directly.
On a tactical weekly basis, it's first and foremost listening. Sometimes someone just needs to talk for the entire time, and then asking questions. Sometimes when they're bringing something up, you ask follow-up questions. You just want to understand what problems they're bringing to you and whether or not they're able to solve them, but not giving them answers. I was laughing because I've had managers wait to give me feedback in one-on-ones, and yeah, you absolutely dread one-on-ones, so don't do that. That's just not cool. And then every 2 to 4 weeks, and it depends on the organization, obviously, and the team, I would focus on their career development, and a lot of that again is listening and asking questions. And then I also have, like I've mentioned before, a very specific individual development plan, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is a tool that I use to help manage them.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I feel that us as the manager, if we've got folks on our team, I say it's on me if I have someone come into a one-on-one and they're surprised at what I have to say, then that's on me, not on them. Now there are some that are we've had employees that are a little bit obtuse out there and they just don't get it. But and I find that in the one-on-one process, I break it down into there's the performance half of the discussion typically, and then there's the development half, and it should all be in concert. And again. Everything that is being discussed should not be a surprise to them, but I like to be able to coalesce it down into very tangible goals and goal setting that kind of bear some resemblance to what we've hopefully been having conversations about, a little bit here, a little bit there, but now, okay, let's refine this and let's make a plan to work on it going forward.
So something I personally have been fascinated with is what percent of someone's success is nature versus nurture. So for all three of our panelists, I want you to think of the highest performing millennial that you've ever seen and tell us what made that individual Great, so we can learn to spot those characteristics in our own hiring profile. Richard?
It's interesting. As I've worked with, say, millennials, not necessarily even working for me, but just seeing someone who's high performing, and I guess you've wondered what do they take it upon themselves to develop themselves, and I don't even think it's a millennial thing. I think it's about as you develop yourself in your career, depending on what stage you are, how quickly you got there. I just think that those you can almost immediately tell that they took ownership of themselves. They took responsibility for themselves and their career, and it's apparent. So that's what I see.
Love it. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. High-performing people take ownership of their career, their own development. They're driven to learn and grow and do even things that aren't asked of them. They ask for challenges when they don't have any. And those who aren't high potential are typically a bit more lazy. They don't care so much about their career. They don't really care about getting to the next level, so they don't mind watching Twitch or whatever live stream, watching someone else game on their computer while they're trying to work, which is not actually happening because they can't work and watch Game of Thrones or Twitch gaming. It's just silly. But passionate, driven people, to me, I think that's their nature. And then the nurture part is giving them some guidance, giving them some direction, giving them challenges to help maximize their potential.
So this is something else that you can kind of suss out during the interview process. If they are a newer developer, they may come in with very little of a history of projects and things that they were really interested in. So then I shift the conversation to, well, what is your passion project? What is something that you've built on your own? Because if they're a developer, they are going to be doing something on their own time to learn and grow. If they're not, it may not be a good fit for your organization. But if they start talking about, well, I built this timekeeping application to watch how long my dogs were outside and playing in the yard. Doesn't matter what it is. Really, the topic doesn't matter. But it just shows you they're willing to go that step further. They're willing to use their own time to continue to grow. What was the challenge that you overcame? Did you go from all the way from beginning to end? How far, let me see it. Let's actually go through it. Let's look at the code. Let's start figuring it out. And seeing those passion projects, you can really start seeing how far they want to go and how inquisitive they are. And then the next thing is, just having those inquisitive people and growing them and continue to ask them questions, because they'll ask you questions. Hey, I want to learn this. I want to know about this other subject, and then you just keep challenging them.
Before we close with our final question, Michael, you mentioned something about a development plan you wanted to share. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. It's something that I learned about 14 years ago. It's a tool that I learned at Target. They're phenomenal at talent development, and it's something that I've kept with me throughout the time. And it's called an individual development plan, or IDP. It is not a performance improvement plan. Sometimes when I bring it to especially young people, they're like, crap, is this a PIP? Am I on a performance improvement plan? No, it's not that. It's actually a plan to help them grow and develop in their career. And it's really simple. It's a document that outlines what are the specific behaviors and opportunities that they need to work on. So it focuses on the behavior. So key opportunities. It goes into the why. Why should they even work on it? What's the value to the team, to the organization, to them as an individual? Then it goes through what's a success look like, what kind of training and skills do you actually need to develop in order to better that behavior? And then it identifies stakeholders. So who is important for their success? Who can give them feedback? And it could be peers, managers, mentors, so even helping them to identify mentors. And the last part is all about accountability. How are they going to demonstrate success in their IDP?
Yeah, it's fun. I'm glad you brought that up because I actually brought mine. And what's interesting about this is from August of 1993. So hey, if my beard didn't date me, this document does. I just started working, but it was called. I started my career with DuPont, and they had something called the targeted development dimensions. And the focus areas were business direction, which focus on long-term view, business expertise, customer focus, and technical functional expertise. Implementation, all about getting results, planning and organizing, networking and team building, people development, and then personal leadership. And then the continuum I talked about earlier, as you break those down, and this is where I just held on to this throughout my career, is that first stage of learning and developing and helping, with regard, and let's say for business direction, long-term view, and then it goes through and defines what the traits are and what they should be doing at each stage, and it just gives you a barometer. So I've been using the same system since '93.
Thank you. Awesome. So this will be our final question before we wrap up and go into Q&A. So we talked a lot about many different ideas. If there was one final thought or piece of advice that you would give our audience so we could better and more effectively hire, manage, and grow millennial talent, what would that final piece of advice be?
I keep it simple. I say pay attention and bring not only your millennials, bring everyone into the conversation and let them be. Like I said, I know we talk a lot about customer experience, for example, and the focus being on the customer. Let everybody on your team contribute to that vision. Right. I use a design thinking methodology to get there. I have consulting in my background, and it's a very consultative process, and you have to have a lot of courage to go into a room with a blank whiteboard and come up with an idea and execute on an idea. But I think that your teams will thank you for it if you bring them into the process from the beginning. Let them be part of the discovery. Let them be part of the formulation and the prototyping, and then you just sail right into building, and then obviously the debrief stage of that process. And I think that's a secret for success.
Thank you, Richard.
I would say be reflective, look in the mirror and ask yourself, how well do you really know the people who are reporting to you? And then ask yourself, are you actively trying to help coach and develop them in their career? And in your next one-on-one, you may even ask them, how am I doing in helping you in your career development? They may not even know what you're talking about. So be reflective, and the manager has a key role. Some people are very driven. They're going to drive their career whether or not you're going to help them. You're there then really just kind of as guideposts, giving them support. Some people need very little care and feeding, but if you're not talking to them at least every once in a while, maybe once in a quarter, it really depends on the organization, then you're not helping them improve in their career.
I'd say just find their passion. Again, I know I brought up passion projects a second ago, but find their passion, find out what they're willing to work on, what they want to work on, what they're wanting to spend their extra time on, and start leading them towards that path. Because if they're going to burn those midnight hours, you want to encourage them to do it on something that is helpful for your organization, and on top of that, helpful for them.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we could please give our panelists a big round of applause. Who's got the first question? Yes. What is your name?
So I'm Jerry Chaparro from Thrive.
Jerry?
And, I have a question. Is a millennial a North American thing? I do a compare and contrast with folks that work in Mumbai. It's a little different. What can you guys share about that?
Interesting question, yeah.
Anyone wants to jump in on
Did everyone hear the question? The question was being a millennial a North American thing? Jerry would like to compare and contrast this age group with individuals in Dubai and perhaps other cultures.
Sure.
That's a good one.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
know.
a really good question. I do believe there are different cultural classifications of people, and I don't know if it's specifically North America, but I actually lived in Bangalore, India for a year as an expat for Target, and I managed a large team of 80 people while I was down there. And back then, I mean, we didn't focus on millennials, so that's why most of my management style isn't whether or not they're millennials. I don't care what generation they are. My management style is unique to them as an individual. And so then that can help cross any kind of cultural nuance, whether they're from India or Eastern Europe or wherever. It doesn't matter. If you're focusing on them as an individual, then you're going to learn about their culture. And if they are a U.S.-based millennial, you'll maybe have similarities with other U.S.-based millennials. But again, focusing on the individual, for me, will transcend any kind of cultural differences.
We have someone who is of millennial age in a director role in our group, and I will say that she often says she struggles with, what she calls these millennials. so I think from her perspective that it's probably a North American thing, because in her German culture she feels like they don't have that. So.
I saw a hand go up in the back.
My question is, one of the hardest things as a manager when the due time comes and you give out raises, in my generation it was called the Jack Welch bell curve. 10% on losing it, 10% on the they don't get anything or they're Xing it out, 10% performers, and everybody else on the top of the bell curve. I don't think that methodology works with millennials, so I'm just wondering, what do you do that's different from that?
So is the question best practices on merit increases for millennials?
Best practice on merit increases in this particular generation.
Thank you for the question.
For me, it was interesting. I'll add to the complexity of that. We had a recent shift where we went from commission-based merit to base plus bonus, and there was a struggle again having a BD team, having them struggle with they were out hunting and basically there was no cap on how much they could make, and then they were going to a base plus bonus. So now it became more merit-based, and there was a real struggle with them. I'd say for me, kind of connecting with them on. Helping them see how they could, where they could grow, how they needed to grow. Again, I had someone who wants to become a manager, so pointing out what he needed to grow in that area. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question because it didn't come on the bell curve side of it, but it did come down to, hey, am I being paid what I'm worth? And my challenge was, well, what are you doing? What are you doing at your current level, and how do you get to the next level? Which, by the way, pays better. So.
So 2 parts to this answer. One, I always try to, anytime you're dealing with pay, it's a negotiation. In any negotiation, I try to bring money out of the only factor, because if it just comes down to money, then everyone's going to lose. Someone's going to feel like they didn't get enough. Someone's going to give too much. It's not going to help. So one thing is to also find out, again, what interests them, and maybe what other levers do you have to incentivize them at that time. Could be anything based on the individual. It could be a lot of stuff. When it comes to actual pay, I find that a lot of people are more focused on, are they being paid fairly than are they just winning? There are going to be those sharks that they want to know that they're at the top of the game, and that's a different situation, a different management. But for a lot of people, it's am I being treated fairly? So you don't have to do a bell curve. It could be just a total, just like bringing the entire tide up to a based on a certain percentage across the board, et cetera. But the big thing is people are going to talk. People are going to find out at some point. I know a lot of companies are actually moving to being very just transparent about, you are at these levels, you're getting paid this much, with certain variation based on how long you've been there. And that actually works really well, just starting to be much more transparent. This is just the way it's going to be. And people will understand that. If they really want to move and it's all about money, they're going to find another company that's going to pay them more. They might not get as much satisfaction, but they'll make their money if that's what they really want.
I've been, I think, fortunate to not work in organizations that have the forced bell curve, and a lot of them have been pay for performance. And so that to me is easy, because when it's pay for performance and they perform well, then I absolutely max out every last penny within my budget to give them. And then in the conversation for delivering the actual performance review as well as their merit increase, I can explain to them how they perform, what they've done well, what they've not done so well, and tie that directly to their increase. And when they're not happy with it, it's usually because they're not happy with their own performance. And then we talk about what can they do to improve their performance, and then in turn improve their increases.
Thank you for the question.
So I have a question similar to what he asked. You answered most of my question, but let me ask in a different way. So my team in this company that I work with right now, plus the previous company, it's a good mix of millennials versus the Gen X, right? So what I've seen in millennials is that they expect instant gratification, right? Not just in money, but recognition and moving up the ladder, right? Have you seen that it's typical that they want to get a hike, let's go up the ladder much quicker? Generation X. How do you kind management above you, and it's okay to give them a promotion. So
I think
So the question real quick is, how do you deal with when a millennial would like to perhaps advance in their career, maybe prematurely based on
I didn't quite get the prematurely part, but I got frequently, or
Okay.
maybe aggressively.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that ties to the company's performance and incentive plans. And Bottle Rocket's a great organization in that very junior talent, they come in and they're in a program for a couple years where they get increases every 6 months. Whereas more like Gen X's and Gen Xers and Boomers, they're used to getting increases every year. I mean, that's what it was like for us. This guy wants an increase every 6 months. And so so you have to tailor your compensation plans to meet the needs of the people in your team. And so we did that. We give them reviews and increases every 6 months, and they were sizable increases, but they're junior talent, so they're really sizable to them. But as a percentage of the organization and the rest of the, especially senior talent, it's pretty small drop in the bucket. So they see the value, they see the increases, and then they get motivation to continue to develop.
Yeah, so you kind of hinted at a few things there, as in there's other things they might interest them to incentivize them. So it's not always about money again. It's, it could be, they get moved to a more exciting project or what they consider more exciting, or they get to go to a conference or, something to that effect. Maybe you just buy them a access to like Coursera or something where they can learn. So, some things don't have to be just a big price tag every 6 months, every year. So just watch out for those other levers and, again, find out what interests them.
Yeah, and I would add, like I said, I think it's about managing expectation. Us as the leaders, we have to help them see what the expectation is at the level they think they're at, and it's important for us to be able to point out where they have growth opportunities. Now, if they're willing to, they're not going to be successful if they're willing to say, "Pay me anyway." Right? You've established that they've not been successful or need skills that they aren't utilizing or showing, and then they still say, "Pay me." Then that's a completely different conversation.
Okay. Yes. Rhonda.
What advice do you all have for hiring managers who are in, let's say, more traditional companies, where the hiring manager would like to manage based on some of the advice that you've given and really hone in on what motivates millennials, but the overarching culture of the company isn't quite there yet?
I know for me, in as much as I can, I try to make it personal. For instance, the culture in my company is 90 years old, so there's a long-standing culture of when I remember when I first joined 9 years ago, I asked, you're out and you're learning and you're asking questions, and I got quickly to the point where I had to say, I'm going to ask you a question, and the answer can't be because that's the way we've always done it, right? And so I found that I had to be kind of that, I knew how I wanted to be, knowing that, especially being, in the technology and this was a non-technical company, right? So I was managing technology for a non-technical company, and you're going to bring in, that's typically where your millennials are going to come in. So I found that I had to manage up and be that gatekeeper while also kind of creating my own culture and understanding where the balances had to be. But I found that I had to kind of have a dual personality there.
Just to echo what you were saying, I think it's like blazing your own path. If they really want to manage them effectively, and I think it's millennials or not, they need to do what is important for those individuals. And to Jonathan's point earlier, it's if you've got a culture in an organization that doesn't traditionally support technology and millennials, they may not have the right compensation plans, and you find other creative ways of ensuring that they're valued as an individual, as a person. But then you said a great word, managing up. You have to manage and help them manage leadership. Like I said, I'm aggressive. So I love managing up, and I love sharing. And you have to do it in a respectful way. There's certain ways of communicating effectively when managing up, but you have to explain to them why the team needs change within the organization if the organization's really going to grow and mature.
So one thing that I've learned at Alto actually is when I first came in, the CEO, he came from McKinsey. And he brought in the McKinsey playbook for this is how we hire, this is how pay goes, this is how everything works. And I can tell you immediately, as soon as he started trying to hire me in as employee number 3, I told him, I was like, this doesn't work for myself or for anyone else that I would hire as part of my team. And changed the conversation. We changed the mode so the way I could come in. But then once it was a matter of continuing to change that process for who we're trying to target. And the way that McKinsey did it and just doesn't work for, again, in this case for technologists, it didn't work for us as to how they wanted to structure all the plans and compensation and everything else. And so sometimes you just have to go back and be like, this structure may not work for the people you're hiring. And it's a hard conversation to have with, I don't know your organization, but I gotta assume that it's not easy to tell them like the compensation plan just doesn't work. But sometimes that's it.
Missy?
I find a lot of pushback we get today is under the guise of collaboration and the stereotypical, I want to work my way, my time, my hours, remotely. I'm going to get it done. But that just doesn't mesh with the fabric of a lot of established organizations nowadays. And so, whether it's inherited or not, how have you dealt with that? And meeting millennial needs, quote unquote, even though it's completely in contrast to what we do.
So here let me repeat the question. So the question is, how do we deal with millennials that may want to, quote unquote, work collaboratively, but on their terms, and also including working remote along with possibly working in the office?
Right. We have different definitions of what collaboration is.
Yep. So they think, I'm on Slack, therefore I'm collaborating. So for myself, I try to set, I try to set up a high context culture where really quickly I make sure to be very explicit with the definition of what I expect at certain times, so the way there's very little question. I expect you to be in the office by 10:30 every day. That is the hard line. You can show up whatever time you want before then, and then I also say, these are basically I'm setting up core hours. These are the core hours we work because we need everyone here. We need to be able to work in a team. There's certain days we actually have everyone working remotely, but that way everyone is remote, and there's less question of when does someone, this person's in on Tuesday, but this one's on Wednesday. No. Everyone's going to be on Tuesday and work remotely. Easy to set up the plan. Core hours are these core hours. Beyond that, you figure out your time, and we can be flexible. So it kind of gives them a little bit of both, a little bit of this is when we're working together and when you are on your own and being an adult.
I got to echo that. To me, it's big on managing expectation, communicating. Like I said, having a shared definition. I love that concept because if you don't, if you establish what that definition is, it doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation. I've had folks before that the whole I'm working from home because my dog or my daughter is sick. And I was like, then you're not working from home. You're taking care of a sick child, and that's PTO. And so I try to establish that as clearly as I can early on. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where I try to show that flexibility, as Jonathan was saying. I've got someone who, I don't know what happened in her last job or who she worked for, but she felt the need to report everything. And I said, I know how much overtime she works. So I said, anything less than half a day, you go take care of it. You don't need to report that to me. She was submitting like 1 hour of PTO. I said, you don't need to do that. I know how hard you work. But but it's that communication both directions, I think.
I would totally echo the communication part of it, and I would challenge that I think the cultures can mesh. If you have the appropriate amount of communication, shared definition. So we wouldn't have shared definition of when a dog is sick or a kid is sick and they're working from home, because I would say they're working flexibly maybe from home, where it's not a full 8 or 10 hours, but they're working as much as they can when they can. But if they need to take time off, I would ask them, like, if you're going to be at the vet or the doctor for half the day, then just take the day off and don't focus on the stressors at work. Focus on the stressors at home. But when they're home, when they're working in a different environment, communication is critical, and making it really clear that how they communicate. So not just being available on Slack, but actually voicing things that are just in their head that they would normally maybe voice to someone who sits in the cube next to them. Voice that publicly in Slack so people can say, hey, I'm logged in for the day. This is what I'm going to focus on. That way there's no questions. Oh, if they're not there, I don't know what the heck they're doing. So over communication sometimes is really important, and making sure that they connect with the right people throughout the day. A lot of it is just communicating frequently and the right way for that team.
Missy? Anyone else? Absolutely.
So I see a cross-pollination taking place between millennials and Gen Xers, for example. And I've noticed things like Gen Xers start to adopt a work from home kind of deal. Some of these situations arise, and some of them turn out to be like, well, is that really what your intent is? And I think sometimes what's starting to happen is an erosion, not an intentional erosion, but an erosion of where actually an organization may be headed. So I see it as a stressful challenge. I also see that there's conflict created by Gen Xers with Gen Xers and millennials because of their different approaches. What thoughts can you guys share regarding how to handle some of these conflicts? A big part of it in my mind is education, educating your current teams that are not necessarily millennials or that have those millennial characteristics. But what are your thoughts on that? Sorry.
So for myself, again, referring back to the context culture, you have high context cultures and low context cultures. Low context cultures, it's that someone starts working and you don't really tell them hard lines about anything. They just kind of have to learn by being there in that amorphous blob of your culture. High context cultures, you're specifically saying this, and you're laying everything out. I actually do prefer the more high context culture, especially when you're dealing with multiple organizations, multiple cultures, and such as Gen X and millennials, because again, the conflict really comes up when someone feels like they're not being treated fairly. If you set out the rules and you set out, this is how we do things in this way, this is how we do things in this way, now the rules are kind of fair across everyone. There's less conflict between each person. Oh, this person showed up at 10:30. Yeah, that's when I told them that they're allowed to show up before, they're fine. And that makes it where you just kind of remove a lot of the issues of the low context culture and the wishy-washy causing problems.
What's that saying? Nature abhors a vacuum. I find that cross-pollination, especially for instance, my leadership team that I work, my peers, we're all Gen Xers, and we've got our boss is a Gen Xer, and we're finding that we're all distributed. We all work from home. We don't come into the office as often, and I find some of those communication challenges present themselves. And then to your point, we're acting a little bit like millennials ourselves, in that it's like, hey, if we were in the office, we would just get up and go down the hall and have a conversation with each other. But then we find ourselves kind of falling into some of those traps, and I think that it's incumbent upon those of us as leaders to recognize when that happens, and then apply, like you said, in that regard.
And I would challenge the team, if the team's got conflict between Xers and millennials, I think a lot of times it's because they don't know some of the whys behind what's important for the millennial. Why do they want to work from home, or why is there maybe a need to work from home? Or if it's an Xer with kids at home and their kid is sick, and I would rather them stay at home for the entire freaking week and not bring the germs in, because God knows they're going to get sick, and then they're going to bring the germs into the office, and others are going to get sick. So if there's open conversation, if people connect and understand the whys behind what's important to them, I think it helps to minimize some of the natural conflict.
Ladies and gentlemen, the time is now 1 o'clock. Let's give a big round of applause to our panel one more time.